Hello to everyone. My name is Malte Leander, a student at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, and this is my presentation titled Recycling the Unwanted, a New Life to Sonic Discard. I'll be speaking on this matter from a set of different angles about the wanted versus the unwanted sound in relationship to acoustic ecology and natural sound environments, but also in the context of speech and language, as well as some examples of how one can be using sonic discard as an asset in audio editing and composition. The first discard that we'll be approaching today is the vast and complex definition of noise. For many, that is the term used for any unwanted sound, leakage in a vocal recording, or simply the traffic outside the bedroom window. What I find interesting is that noise in this context is highly interpretable, of where the discard itself that we'll be talking about today is closely linked and related to the context in which it's being discussed. In early times of acoustic ecology, the traditional way of classifying the wanted and the unwanted, done by the World Soundscape Project in the 1970s, was to make the distinctions between biophony and anthrophony. These two terms are dividing sounds, meaning that we are classifying the sounds that are deriving from the natural environment versus the human-generated sounds. And all this might seem like a fair division at first glance, but this way of categorizing our soundscapes can become problematic, and even more so in a contemporary setting. There is undoubtedly no escaping the fact that noise pollution is a continuously growing problem in our modern times, with vast consequences on both our societies but also on our individual health. However, the way that we think about noise and live with it can change our behavior drastically. I'm quoting Australian researcher and artist Jordan Lacey here. We should build a new relationship with urban noise. Rather than attempt to escape it, we should actively reshape the urban roar. With this in mind, we are able to repurpose what was previously discarded as noise and instead find new value in the unwanted. This is a vital distinction and allows for a new territory of creation. May it be to integrate and work with recordings of ventilation systems, vacuums, creaky floors, loud motors, and instead be using the noise to our advantage. Or simply come to the realization that the urban soundscape is here to stay and is natural in relation to the city and city life, and in that case learn to work with the discarded noise instead of fighting it. Moving on to a bit of another context here, another example of discard, will now focus a bit more on language. As mentioned previously, the discard that we've been discussing so far is itself relative, depending on where we put the bar of making the distinction between something of value and something that is defined to be of no use at all. In the example with language here, everything without any semantic meaning could perhaps automatically be classified to not having any use due to the primary function of language being communication. So more abstract forms of use of language can therefore, from this point of view, be seen as a repurposing of the unwanted when put in relation to the semantic value. An example of this can be seen in poetry, where the nuance in language and meaning is of the utmost importance to the reader, to affect the reader in the specific way that was intended by the author. But on the other side of the spectrum lies the genres of sound poetry and text sound composition. And in these cases, emphasis and importance is put instead on the acoustical and timbral properties and qualities rather than the semantics of the words that are being spoken in those genres or in those contexts. So instead of sentences, paralanguage, fragmented speech, and other types of vocally induced noises are used and often dominating these practices as well. So again, we reach an example then of relativity depending on in what context something is valuable. If we stick for a moment to the example here of language, then we can zoom into an even closer level and look at the phonemes constructing the words and therefore the sentences themselves. So here as well, it is possible to categorize into opposites. Wanted to the unwanted, or in this case, in the example of division of phonemes, often the terms pleasant versus the unpleasant is being used in a research called phonesthetics. And in this practice, there is something called also a semantic net, which is essentially a sort of hierarchical structure that classifies words through their phonetical structure from the most to the least pleasant sounding words. If instead of focusing on the semantic value of the word, we value the structure through the classification of sound symbolism, where the meaning of the word is kept independent from how it sounds. Then in that case, is there really such a thing as an ugly word? Depending on where we put the emphasis or the weight, the semantic value and therefore the significance of the word, or more so just the sound of how the structure of the word is actually sounding, is an interesting thought to dwell on. We can have a look at a semantic net here where some parameters such as a large number of syllables and a variety of different articulations are important to the definition of the word in question being pleasantly sounding. So even if jazz is the greatest thing for some people, a favorite genre, and holds positive connotations to the word and to the music, it is considered as a highly unpleasant word only when looking at the phonesthetic value of it. So, reusing the vocabulary previously applied to the sonic discard in the context of noise and natural sound environments that we discussed earlier, then through this lens, looking at language, we can see that there is also beauty in what at first glance or at first listen appeared to be unpleasant, unwanted, or discarded. Or the other way around, here with the example of jazz, something that holds positivity and beauty to many is through the lens of phonesthetics more seen as something unpleasant or ugly. So again, to summarize this section, if looking at language and not only focusing on the main purpose of communication, instead seeing the vast amount of possibility in what is defined by many as discard, then new interesting vocal content can appear, not with any semantic value, but packed with textual and timbral richness. Again, we'll be shifting the topic just slightly from linguistics now to technicalities in music production, and yet another example of discard, another form that can yield interesting results sonically when composing. So in this example, we'll talk a bit about how we could recycle digital sonic discard into new, interesting material for potential use in audio editing or composition. This technique aims to use the remainder of a given sound after having used a destructive effect in your DAW, for example. So in the case of using filters with an EQ, the delta, which is what is being shaved off of the original sound in question, can yield very interesting results focusing on what is being taken off instead of the original sound source. So we are shifting the attention from the original purpose and idea to what is being taken away or discarded. So in other words, you're sort of reversing the role of the EQ and changing places between the wanted and the unwanted. And this concept can be applied in other contexts as well. Using a de-esser would be resulting in a great deal of sharp sibilants, for example, the ones you would normally want to get rid of in recorded speech. But yet again, focusing on these instead of your original sound source can yield some interesting sound material to be working with. So what I've been going over here are only a few examples of where the unwanted can become desirable, again, with a slight shift of mindset and an openness to repurposing what has been previously discarded. And I'm sure you'll be able to find a lot of other contexts or situations where that is applicable as well. So thanks for listening to this presentation. I wish you all the best. Thanks.